Kola and Amara lived in a single room that looked as though it was stitched together by the hands of poverty itself. The walls were so thin that the laughter, quarrels, and whispers of their neighbors were like uninvited guests in their home. When the wind blew, the zinc roof trembled as if it might peel off and fly away, and whenever it rained, water trickled down through familiar cracks, forming tiny streams that Kola had learned to guide with old buckets and plastic bowls. It was the kind of home where the floor creaked, the air stayed hot even at night, and every item inside seemed older than both of them combined. Amara, heavy with child, moved around the room with slow, careful steps, one hand always pressed against her lower back. She complained, not because she was ungrateful, but because her fears had grown louder than her hope. Each morning she woke to the same suffocating heat, the same hunger twisting her stomach, and the same helpless thought: what kind of world am I bringing this baby into? Sweat always clung to her forehead, and every little thing irritated her: the squeaking fan that barely turned, the noisy generator outside, even the way Kola walked quietly so as not to disturb her. She felt her life shrinking as her belly grew heavier. But most of all, she complained about Kola's tiny daily earnings. She knew he tried. She saw the exhaustion on his face when he returned late in the evening, smelling of dust and sweat, his hands roughened from lifting loads that were often too heavy for the pay he received. He worked anywhere, doing anything. One day mixing cement with laborers, another day pushing carts in the market, the next helping a mechanic with oily hands he could barely clean afterward. Yet no matter how hard he worked, the money never stretched far enough. Rice finished too fast. Soap finished too fast. Even hope finished too fast. In the evenings, when the heat was strongest and the baby kicked restlessly inside her, Amara would sit on the edge of their old mattress and speak her fears aloud. She complained that the world felt too hard, that the future looked too dark, that she was tired of sitting in a room with peeling paint and broken dreams. Her voice would tremble as she asked questions Kola had no answers to. What will this child eat? What if I fall sick during childbirth? What if something happens to you one day and I'm left alone? Kola would kneel in front of her, gently placing his calloused hand on her knee, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. He always tried to calm her, telling her things would get better, telling her that love was enough, telling her that he would work harder, even though he had no idea how much more his body could endure. Sometimes her words were sharp, heavy with frustration, cutting through him in ways she didn't realize. But he never raised his voice in return. He never walked away. He simply held on to her hand, letting her pour out everything trapped inside her heart. He understood her complaints were born from desperation, not wickedness. They were two people trapped inside the fists of poverty, each trying not to crumble. Their tiny room smelled of warm dust, baby clothes neatly folded in one corner, and dreams postponed in another. Outside, life continued. Children laughing in the compound, radios blasting from balconies, neighbors arguing over water or fuel. But inside that cramped space, Kola and Amara lived inside a bubble of fear, love, and uncertainty. Each night, when Amara finally drifted to sleep, Kola would lie beside her, watching the rise and fall of her chest and the gentle movement of the unborn baby. He would whisper into the darkness, promising a better life, even if he didn't know how it would come. And though Amara complained, though she wept and nagged and worried, he still looked at her with tenderness, because beneath her words lived the same thing beating inside his own chest, the raw, aching wish for a future they could be proud of. Their story began in that cramped, fragile room. Two young lovers, broken by the world, but still holding on to each other, hoping the baby they were expecting would be the miracle that life had denied them for so long. Kola's days began before the sun even thought of rising. Long before the compound rooster crowed, long before the air was warm enough to breathe comfortably, he was already on the road, his faded slippers slapping against the dusty ground as he hurried through quiet streets. He never knew what job the day would bring. He simply walked with hope in his pocket and determination in his bones. Some mornings he found himself at construction sites, joining groups of tired men whose faces were permanently marked by cement and sun. They lifted heavy blocks, mixed sand, and carried cement bags that felt like boulders strapped to their backs. Kola would plant his feet, bend his knees, and hoist each bag with his teeth clenched, his muscles burning as though they were tearing open from the inside. The supervisors rarely looked at their faces. They only shouted commands, waved hands, and demanded more speed. But Kola pushed through it all, thinking only of Amara's swollen belly and the unborn child who would depend on him. Other days, he found himself at a car wash by the roadside, water splashing on his jeans as he scrubbed dusty tires and wiped down windshields with torn rags. The sun beat down on him mercilessly, turning his back into a hot sheet of pain. Sometimes customers didn't tip him. Sometimes they mocked him. Sometimes they tossed coins at him like he was begging. But he kept scrubbing, kept smiling, kept whispering inside his heart that one day things would change. When the car wash had no work, he moved to the market. There, he pushed wheelbarrows for people carrying bags of rice, tomatoes, yams, and fruits. The wheelbarrow handles were rough, almost sharp, and every day they carved new wounds into his palms. His legs always shook after hours of pushing loads twice his size, weaving through the noisy crowds and trying not to collide with anyone. Yet whenever someone handed him money, even if it was just a handful of worn notes, he would bow his head in gratitude because he knew every naira mattered. And then there were mornings when he worked at the truck loading area. Before dawn, heavy trucks would park by the roadside, their backs packed with crates, bags, or pieces of equipment. The foreman would blow whistles, and the men would gather like soldiers preparing for battle. They lifted, stacked, pulled, dragged, whatever was needed. Kola's shirt was always drenched with sweat before the first hour passed. Sometimes blisters burst open on his palms. Sometimes his knees buckled from exhaustion. But he kept going, telling himself he had to earn enough for Amara to eat well, for the baby to be born strong. He rarely stopped to rest. He could not afford it. Hunger stalked him, but he never let it slow him down. Pain followed him everywhere, but he never let it win. At the end of each day, when the sky painted itself orange and the streets grew busy again, Kola would turn toward home with shoulders heavy but heart determined. By the time he reached their compound, he had transformed himself again. He would stop outside, wipe his sweat-soaked face with the back of his shirt, shake off the dust, and straighten his posture. As he stepped into the room, he always carried the same gentle smile, the one he had practiced so well that Amara had never noticed the sadness behind it. "Welcome," she would say, her voice tired, sometimes irritated. Kola would respond with warmth, even when every muscle in his body screamed, "My love, how are you and the baby?" He never told her how many times his back almost gave out under the weight of cement. He never mentioned the insults customers threw at him at the car wash. He never spoke of the foreman who shouted in his face or of the coins that felt like pity when they landed in his hand. He simply brought home his smile, his laughter, his small earnings, and his quiet strength. Every night, when Amara finally fell asleep, he would lie beside her, staring at the cracked ceiling, letting the truth of his pain settle into the silence. His arms throbbed, his legs pulsed, and his hands ached. But even then, he found comfort in one thought. As long as my family eats, as long as they are safe, I can endure anything. And the next morning, before the world woke up, he would rise again to begin the cycle, searching for work, fighting through exhaustion, and returning home with that same tender smile, determined to protect Amara from the weight he carried alone. Amara went into labor on a night that felt cursed and blessed at the same time. The air was heavy, the kind that made breathing feel like work. Outside, the sky was dark and swollen with clouds, but no rain fell. The compound was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that makes every little sound feel louder than it should. Earlier that evening, Amara had complained of small pains in her lower stomach. Kola thought they were the usual pregnancy discomforts, the same ones she had been feeling for days. But as the night deepened, the pains grew sharper. Amara began to hold her stomach and breathe in short, frightened gasps. Soon she could no longer walk properly. She leaned on the wall, her face twisted in pain. "Kola, something is wrong. I think it's time," she whispered. Kola's heart jumped. He rushed to grab the phone and call the midwife who lived in the next street, but the phone refused to come on. The battery had died earlier, and they had forgotten to charge it. No problem, he thought. The generator. But when he pulled the rope, the generator coughed once, twice, and died completely. Kola tried again and again until sweat soaked his face, but it refused to start. It had been misbehaving for weeks, and now, on the worst possible night, it finally gave up. Amara screamed as another wave of pain hit her, stronger than before. She fell to her knees, gripping the edge of the bed. "Kola, please. Call somebody," she cried. Kola ran outside to the neighbor's room and banged on their door. No answer. He went to 3 more rooms, knocking and shouting, but people were either fast asleep or pretending not to hear. It was too late in the night, and no one wanted to open their door for trouble. When he returned to their small room, Amara was sweating all over, crying and shaking. She had never looked so terrified in her life. Kola knelt beside her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "I'm here. I'm here. Please breathe slowly," he whispered, even though he was shaking inside. The power was out. The room was dark except for the faint moonlight slipping through the broken window. Amara's cries echoed against the thin walls. Every minute, the contractions grew stronger. Soon she was screaming, gripping Kola's hands so tightly that he thought his bones would break. "Kola, I can't do this. I can't," she screamed. "You can. Please try. Our baby is coming," he said, trying to sound calm, even though tears were already gathering in his eyes. Minutes felt like hours. Kola had no experience, no training. He had only seen childbirth in movies and heard stories from older women. But tonight he had no choice. He spread a clean wrapper on the bed, placed another on the floor, and begged God not to let anything go wrong. Amara pushed and cried, her voice breaking again and again. Sweat covered her whole body, and she trembled as though her strength was leaving her. Kola held her, wiped her face, whispered words he wasn't even sure made sense. Then suddenly, through the darkness, he saw the baby's head. "Amara, she's coming. I can see her," he shouted, a mix of panic and joy. Amara screamed with everything she had left. One final push, one desperate cry, and then, in the small, hot room where the generator had died, and help had failed to come, a tiny baby girl slipped into Kola's shaking hands. For a moment, everything went silent. The world felt frozen. Kola held the tiny, slippery body, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. Then the baby let out a loud, sharp cry that filled the room like a burst of light. Amara burst into tears. Kola's chest collapsed with relief. He tied the cord trembling, wrapped the baby in a soft cloth, and placed her gently on Amara's chest. The baby was warm, fragile, and beautiful. Her little fingers curled around Amara's, and her cry turned into soft whimpers. Kola looked down at his daughter and whispered, voice cracking, "She's a miracle, a real miracle." And that became her name. Miracle, born in darkness, born in fear, born in a moment when everything went wrong yet somehow turned out right. A child who arrived on a night when the generator died, the phone failed, and the midwife never showed, but still came into the world safely, as if carried by unseen hands. Kola and Amara held their baby girl close, the small room fading away, their worries forgotten for that moment. In the middle of their poverty, in the middle of uncertainty and fear, a miracle had indeed been given to them. After Miracle was born, life became even harder for Kola. The little money he used to manage before was no longer enough. A new baby meant milk, diapers, medicine, and extra food for Amara, who was still recovering. Every day felt like a new mountain he had to climb, and Kola climbed it with tired legs and an empty stomach. He woke up earlier than before, sometimes before the night was even over. While Amara and Miracle slept, he would sit on the edge of the bed, rubbing his eyes and whispering a small prayer. His body always felt weak, but his heart pushed him forward. He wanted his family to have a better life, even if it meant giving up everything for them. Most days, Kola worked from morning to night without eating a proper meal. Sometimes he bought a small loaf of bread and kept it in his pocket, but whenever he thought of Amara and Miracle at home, waiting, hungry, he would wrap the bread again and save it for them. On the hardest days, he drank only water from the public tap, letting it fill his stomach so he could keep working. His ribs slowly became more visible, his clothes hung looser, but he kept telling himself it was only for a little while, just until things got better. But things did not get better. Amara was getting more and more frustrated. The baby cried often, especially at night, and Amara, who was always tired, would start crying too. She couldn't sleep well, she couldn't rest, and the tiny room always felt too hot and too small. Sweat dripped from her skin all day, and no matter how many times she fanned herself, the heat refused to go away. One afternoon, Miracle cried for almost 2 hours straight. Amara held her, rocked her, shook her gently, but nothing worked. The sound filled the whole room and pierced her heart. When Kola returned home with just a little food in a nylon bag, Amara's eyes flashed with anger. "Is this all you brought?" she asked sharply. "Kola, how do you expect me to eat this? What about the baby? What do you want us to do?" Kola looked at the food, then at her tired face, and swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. Today was slow. I tried the construction site, the car wash, the market, everywhere was full. I'm tired of hearing I tried." "Kola," she snapped, her voice tight with frustration. "Every day I sit here with this crying baby in this hot room. You don't know what it feels like. You go out, you move around, but I am stuck here. I didn't choose this life." Kola felt her words like stones thrown at his chest. He wanted to explain. He wanted to tell her about how his legs shook from hunger, how the sun burned his back all day, how he almost collapsed while pushing a wheelbarrow. But he kept quiet. He didn't want to hurt her more. Miracle's crying grew louder, and Amara pressed her hands against her ears, tears spilling down her face. "I can't do this anymore. I can't. This baby cries every hour. I'm tired. I'm hungry. I'm hot. I feel trapped." Kola stepped closer to her, trying to touch her shoulder, but she shook his hand away. He stood there silently, unsure of what to say. He loved his wife deeply, but he didn't know how to remove the pain from her heart when he himself carried so much. At night, when Amara finally slept, Kola sat on the floor beside the bed, holding Miracle in his arms. He rocked her gently, whispering to her even though she couldn't understand his words. "Please, my baby, calm down. Your mummy is tired. She's scared. Daddy is trying. He's trying very hard." Miracle finally fell asleep on his chest, her tiny breath warm against his skin. Kola looked down at her and felt both joy and deep sadness. He wished he could give her more. He wished he could give Amara the life she dreamed of. But poverty was like a tight rope around his neck, pulling harder every day, and he didn't know how to escape it yet. The next morning, he left again before sunrise, empty stomach, heavy heart. As he walked to look for work, he could still hear Amara's voice from the night before, angry, tired, hopeless. But he didn't blame her. He just prayed that one day he would bring home good news. One day, he would bring home enough money to stop her complaints, enough money to fill the room with peace instead of tears. Until then, he would keep working, keep starving, keep smiling, and keep hoping. The storm that night felt like the sky was tearing itself apart. Thunder rolled again and again, shaking the thin walls of their small room. Rain hammered the leaking roof with such force that it sounded like thousands of stones falling from above. The wind pushed against the windows, making them rattle as if they might burst open. Inside the room, the lantern had gone out hours ago, leaving everything swallowed in darkness except for the quick flashes of lightning that lit the room for a heartbeat before fading again. Kola had been asleep, but not deeply. He never slept deeply anymore. The weight of responsibility always pressed on him even in his dreams. He reached out with his hand to touch Amara's side of the bed, as he did every night, just to feel she was there. But this time, his palm landed on cold, empty space. He frowned a little in his sleep, shifted, and reached again. Still empty. His eyes opened slowly. "Amara," he whispered into the darkness. Another flash of lightning lit up the room for a split second, showing him the same thing he had felt. The bed was empty. Completely empty. He sat up quickly, heart beginning to thump with a quiet fear he could not yet name. He thought maybe she had gone to the bathroom. He waited a few seconds, listening. Nothing. Only the storm, roaring like an angry beast outside. He stood up and walked to the small bathroom. The door was open. The bathroom was empty. Confused now, Kola checked the corner where their small cooking area was. Empty. He checked near the door. Empty. He even called her name softly again, but only the thunder answered. A sharp cry suddenly cut through the room. "Miracle!" The baby's wail rose shakily from her small wooden cot near the window. Kola rushed to her, his heart pounding faster now, but not just because of the storm. Something was wrong. He lifted Miracle into his arms, holding her close. Her tiny body trembled as she cried into his chest. He rocked her gently, patting her back, whispering, "Shoo, Daddy is here. Daddy is here." But his eyes were moving around the room with growing panic. Amara was still nowhere to be seen. He laid Miracle carefully on the bed and reached for the lantern, trying to light it. The matchbox was almost finished, but he struck a match and brought the flame close. The lantern came alive with a small, shaky light that pushed some of the darkness away. Now he could see clearly. Amara was not in the room at all. Kola checked their small wardrobe. Her wrapper was missing. Her slippers were gone. He looked for a note. On the table, under the pillow, beside the lantern, near the plates. Nothing. Not a single word. Not a clue. Not even a hurried message scratched on paper. His hands began to tremble. He went outside into the rain, barefoot, shouting her name into the night. The cold water soaked him instantly. The wind pushed against him. The compound was dark, silent, every door closed. He went from one room to another, knocking, calling softly, begging for help, but no one answered. The hour was too late, the storm too fierce. No one wanted to open their door. Kola walked back to the room slowly, each step heavy. He was drenched from head to toe, and the storm seemed to get louder the moment he returned inside, as if mocking him. Miracle was on the bed, crying again, confused by the loud noises and the sudden loneliness. He picked her up, holding her to his chest as he sank to the floor. He felt her tiny fists curl into his shirt. Her crying softened, becoming small whimpers as she breathed against him. Kola pressed his cheek to the top of her head, his breath shaking. "Where is your mother?" he whispered, though the baby could not answer. He looked around the room again, as if hoping she would suddenly appear from a corner. But reality was cold and sharp. Amara was gone. She had walked out into the night, into the storm, leaving behind her child and the man who had given her everything he had, even when he had nothing. The room felt colder than it had ever felt. The silence, between the thunder, was heavy enough to crush the chest. Kola felt something break inside him, quietly, painfully, something he didn't have the words for. He looked at Miracle's small face, her eyes half closed, still wet with tears. She had no idea what had happened. No idea that her mother had left them. No idea that her father's heart was shattering slowly as he rocked her in his arms. The storm continued outside, wild and unforgiving. But inside that tiny room, another storm had begun, one that no one could hear except Kola. He held Miracle tighter and wiped her tears with shaking fingers. "I will not leave you," he whispered, voice breaking. "Even if your mother does, I will stay. I promise." He rocked her gently until she fell asleep against his chest. He did not sleep at all. He sat there in the dim lantern light, staring at the door, waiting for it to open, hoping she would walk back in. But the night passed, the storm ended, the sky grew pale, and Amara never returned. Kola did not know when strength became something he no longer searched for, but simply lived with. Every morning before the sun woke, he tied Miracle to his back with an old wrapper that once belonged to Amara. It was the only thing she left behind, the only proof that she had ever been there. Miracle would cling to his shoulders, warm and quiet, her tiny hands gripping the cloth as if she understood that her father was all she had now. Kola would breathe in, adjust her weight, and begin another day of chasing any work he could find. At construction sites, he carried blocks while Miracle slept against him, her small breaths warm on his neck. Workers joked that she was the foreman watching over her father. Some laughed at him, calling him housewife or mother of the year as they passed by with their cement bags. Others shook their heads and said he was wasting his life. But Kola ignored them. He worked with a calmness that made people stop and stare. He would bend, lift, sweat, and stand again, never once complaining, never once wishing someone else would carry his burden. When he washed cars by the roadside, people gathered to look at Miracle tied behind him. Some customers refused to give him jobs, saying a man who carried a child on his back was irresponsible. Others paid him more than he asked, touched by the sight. A few market women would come out from their shops, adjust the wrapper on his back, fan the baby, or give her small kunu to drink. They would tease him and say, "God bless you, Papa Miracle. One day this child will change your life." In the heat of the market, when he pushed wheelbarrows piled with plantain or sacks of gari, Miracle clung to him like a warm heartbeat. Sometimes she cried loudly, and people would turn to stare at the strange picture of a man soothing a baby while dragging heavy loads across muddy ground. Kola would stop, bounce her gently until her cries softened, wipe her face with the corner of his shirt, then keep moving again. Every step hurt. Every breath carried the ache of being abandoned, of being judged, of having no one to lean on. But Miracle's small fingers would curl against his skin, and strength would rise inside him again. Children in the neighborhood knew him. They followed him sometimes, chanting, "The man who works with his baby. The man who works with his baby." It made him smile, even on the hardest days. Old men shook his hand, calling him a good father. Some women whispered that Amara was wicked for leaving him. Others whispered that he was a fool for staying faithful to a woman who had not stayed faithful to him. But Kola never spoke badly about her. Not once. When Miracle grew old enough to speak, she would tug his ears and call him Papa, her voice soft like morning rain. She loved sleeping on his back, and whenever he untied the wrapper, she would cry as if he was removing a part of her. She was his comfort, his companion, his reason to rise every morning, and his reason to keep moving even when his body begged him to stop. As months turned into years, people stopped mocking him. They began to respect him, admire him, even greet him with warm smiles. His story spread across the community. The man who went to every job with a baby tied to his back. The man who never gave up. The man who worked like he was fighting for his life every day. And without knowing it, Kola had become something rare, an example, a light, a testimony of love that refused to die. Miracle grew into a bright, strong little girl, and the world began to see what Kola had always seen. She wasn't just a burden he carried. She was the miracle that carried him. By the time Miracle turned 3, the little girl who once rode quietly on Kola's back had become a bright flame that warmed every corner of his life. She was small, with curious eyes that glowed like early morning sun on water, and a smile that came easily, so easily that even people who woke up angry found themselves smiling back at her. She called him Papa Coco, a name she formed when she was learning to speak, and it stuck to him like a second skin. Everywhere Kola went, Miracle followed with quick feet and bubbling laughter. She refused to stay with neighbors or caretakers, even when they begged to hold her. Instead, she clung to Kola's hand as if it was the safest place in the world. And for her it was. On mornings when he woke up before dawn, she would wake too, rubbing her eyes, insisting, "Papa Coco, I am coming." He would try to tuck her back into their worn mattress, telling her she needed sleep, but she always shook her head stubbornly and whispered, "No, I want to go with you." In the end, he always carried her, her sleepy head resting on his shoulder, her tiny arms locked around his neck. At construction sites, she sat under makeshift shades, playing with sand and singing songs she invented on the spot. Sometimes she would stand and clap as he lifted heavy blocks, shouting, "Papa Coco is strong, strong like stone." The workers adored her. They taught her small jokes, bought her biscuits, and sometimes stopped work just to hear her talk. Even the ones who once mocked Kola now greeted him with respect, because they had seen how love had shaped him, how he had become both father and mother without losing his gentle heart. In the market, Miracle was a little queen. She knew every corner, every road, every shout of the sellers. She skipped around Kola as he pushed wheelbarrows or washed cars, waving shyly at customers and offering to help by handing him small buckets or cloths. Some people said Miracle brought luck wherever she went because Kola's customers increased whenever she was around. When Kola rested, she sat beside him, swinging her legs, talking endlessly about birds she saw, colors she liked, or the stories she imagined about clouds. She always leaned her head on his arm, her voice soft and trusting. And each time she did, Kola felt something deep in his chest, something warm, almost painful, something like joy and heartbreak combined. She was growing so fast, too fast, but she was growing with love. At night, she refused to sleep unless his hand was on her back. If he removed it, she would whisper, "Papa Coco, are you here?" He always answered, "I am here, Miracle." She would sigh softly, smile in the darkness, and return to her dreams. Their bond became the kind of thing people spoke about quietly and admired from afar. Some called it beautiful, some called it rare. Others said that God had tied father and daughter together in a way no abandonment, no heartbreak, no hunger could ever break. The love they shared became a story in the neighborhood, a story of struggle turned into something tender, something unshakable. And Kola, who once cried alone in the dark with a newborn in his arms, now walked with his head high because a small hand held his tightly and a bright voice called him Papa Coco with pride. Miracle had become more than his child. She was his hope, his strength, his laughter, and the only proof he needed that his life still had beauty in it. The day started like any other, with Kola tying Miracle securely to his back, her small arms wrapped tightly around his neck, her legs tucked in the old wrapper he had learned to tie just right over the years. They walked the familiar dusty road to the fuel station, where Kola had been called to help clean the pumps and scrub oil stains from the concrete. The sun was hot, the kind of heat that made sweat run into your eyes and stick your clothes to your skin, but Kola didn't complain. He moved methodically, scrubbing, wiping, bending, lifting, Miracle shifting lightly with every step, humming little songs as she always did. As he bent to clean around one of the pumps, something caught his eye. A small piece of paper fluttered across the concrete, caught briefly in a puddle of water. He picked it up, squinting against the sun, and realized it was a lottery ticket. Not just any lottery ticket. He recognized the colors, the numbers printed boldly across its surface, and he knew it was valuable. His heart skipped a beat. The thought of money, real money, swirled through his mind. For years he had worked from dawn to dusk, scraping together tiny coins, and here was something that could change everything in an instant. But as he held the ticket, Kola's mind immediately thought of the owner. Somewhere, someone had lost this. Maybe they were frantic, maybe they were poor, maybe this ticket was their only hope of survival. He had seen too much pain and desperation in his own life to take something that did not belong to him. Even with Miracle on his back, her small hand patting his shoulder, he knew what he had to do. The fuel station had a small office at the back where the manager, an old man with a neatly pressed shirt and graying hair, was sitting. Kola approached, carefully holding the ticket in his hand, Miracle shifting curiously behind him. "Sir," he said, his voice steady despite the excitement in his chest, "I found this lottery ticket outside. I think it belongs to someone. I just wanted to return it." The old man looked at the ticket, then at Kola, then back at the ticket again. He had a faint frown at first, as if he could not believe what he was hearing. You didn't try to claim it for yourself?" he asked slowly, as if tasting the words. Kola shook his head. "No, sir. It's not mine. I wouldn't take it. I thought the owner should have it." The man's eyes widened, and he leaned back in his chair, staring at Kola with something between disbelief and admiration. Most people would have taken it immediately," he said softly. "But you returned it." Kola looked at Miracle, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes, and shrugged slightly. "I don't need luck from someone else's hand. I'll work for mine." The old man was silent for a moment. Then he rose slowly from his chair. He walked over, placing a hand on Kola's shoulder with surprising firmness. "I have never met anyone like you," he said. "You have honesty, courage, and something most people don't even know exists anymore. You work hard, and yet you don't take what is not yours." He paused, looking at Miracle, then back at Kola. "I want to reward you. I want to give you a sum of money that will change your life and a job in my company. You will no longer struggle the way you have been struggling. Do you understand?" Kola's mouth went dry. His heart raced so fast he thought it might burst. He could hardly believe it. "Sir, I don't know what to say," he whispered. "You don't need to say anything," the old man said with a smile. "You have already said everything with your actions. Take this as a start. Build a better life for you and your daughter. You deserve it." Kola's hands shook as the man handed him an envelope. Inside was not just money, enough to fill the gaps of years of hardship, but also documents, a letter of employment, a promise of stability he had never dared dream of. Miracle giggled from his back, patting his shoulder, as if she knew too that this moment was the start of something magical. On that day, in the heat and dust of a small fuel station, Kola felt his life shift. Years of toil, hunger, and endless struggle had not gone unnoticed, not by God, not by chance, and certainly not by those who recognized true honesty. As he left the fuel station, holding Miracle close, a small smile crept onto his face, one he had not allowed himself in a long time. For the first time, the world seemed wide, full of possibility, and brighter than he had ever imagined. And in that moment, Kola knew that hard work, love, and honesty had finally begun to repay him in ways he never thought possible. Within a few short months, Kola's life began to bloom in ways he had only ever dared imagine in quiet prayers whispered into the night. The money he had received from the old man, combined with the new job in the company, gave him a foothold he had never possessed before. He no longer scrambled from one day to the next, hoping for coins to feed Miracle and himself. Instead, he had enough to breathe, to plan, and to build. The first thing he did was look for a home. Not just any home, but a space where Miracle could laugh freely, run safely, and where he could finally rest without worrying about leaky roofs or cold nights. He walked into a small estate, where the walls were solid, the floors smooth, and the roof strong against both sun and rain. For the first time in years, he felt the thrill of certainty. He walked through each room, imagining Miracle running from corner to corner, her laughter filling the air, and he smiled so widely that he felt tears rise to his eyes. When he handed over the payment and received the keys, he held Miracle close and whispered, "This is ours now, baby, our home." Next, he started a small business. Nothing grand at first, just a little shop selling basic goods, something he could manage himself, and something that could grow over time. He worked tirelessly, balancing the business with his job in the company. He rose before the sun, arranged shelves, polished counters, and carefully counted every naira. But even as he worked, he made sure Miracle's world remained full of love and attention. She would sit on a small stool, coloring with crayons, watching him with wide eyes, asking endless questions about everything he did. Education became another priority. He enrolled Miracle in a good school, one with neat classrooms, a small playground, and teachers who cared. On her first day, he knelt down to tie her little shoes, adjusting the bow with care and smoothing down her uniform. "You will learn so much here, my darling," he whispered. Miracle looked up at him and smiled, her small hand clutching his finger, and he felt a swell of pride so intense it made his chest ache. Even as his life improved, Kola remained the same humble man he had always been. He still carried Miracle on his shoulders when she grew tired, her little legs swinging as he walked through the busy streets or the quiet compound. He would hold her hand as they crossed the roads, help her with every little task, and stay patient through her questions, her giggles, and her occasional tantrums. The world had given him wealth, yes, but it had not stolen his heart. He had power now, but he never allowed it to change the way he loved his daughter. Neighbors and friends began to notice the transformation. Some whispered about the miracle man, the one who had endured so much yet never lost kindness. Others watched in awe as he walked with Miracle on his shoulders, smiling, patient, and completely devoted. They could see the bond that had grown even stronger through hardship, a bond that wealth had not diminished but only allowed to flourish more fully. At night, after the shop was closed and Miracle slept soundly in her new, soft bed, Kola would sit in the quiet of the house, staring out of the window at the lights of the estate. He thought about the long days of struggle, the empty stomachs, the tears, the endless labor, and he shook his head in disbelief. And yet he smiled. He had not forgotten those days. He would never forget them. They had shaped him, strengthened him, and made him appreciate every simple pleasure of life. The warmth of Miracle's hand, the sound of her laughter, the smooth floors beneath his feet, the walls that did not leak, and the small shop where he could finally build something steady for the future. Kola had changed his life, yes, but he had also protected something far more precious: the innocence, happiness, and love of the little girl who called him Papa Coco. And as he carried her on his shoulders through the bright streets, their laughter echoing, he knew that no wealth, no mansion, no business could ever replace the joy of these simple, shared moments. These were the true treasures he had worked for, and these treasures were his forever. Their new life settled into a rhythm that felt almost dreamlike after years of struggle. The house, once just walls and a roof, became a home filled with laughter, light, and warmth. Morning sunlight spilled through clean windows, dancing across the polished floors as Miracle raced from room to room, her small feet pattering like a joyful drumbeat. Kola, always nearby, prepared breakfast, dressed her neatly for school, and walked her to the gate with the careful patience of a man who had once been too busy surviving to notice such simple pleasures. Neighbors and friends could not help but notice the remarkable change. Kola, who had once labored under the weight of poverty and exhaustion, now moved with a quiet confidence, always gentle, always present. His devotion to Miracle became a story people told with admiration. Women whispered that he was a rare kind of father, one who didn't just provide food or shelter, but time, love, and unwavering attention. Men nodded respectfully when they saw him carrying Miracle on his shoulders or tying her shoes, recognizing in him a steadfastness that had been forged in hardship and tempered by love. Miracle, for her part, flourished in the shelter of her father's care. She was no longer the quiet, small baby who clung tightly to him. She was confident, curious, and full of life. Her laughter filled every corner of their home and even spilled into the streets when she ran alongside Kola or waved to neighbors. She asked endless questions about the world, shared stories she invented, and spoke with the clarity of someone who had never been neglected, never doubted that love would follow her wherever she went. Papa Coco is my superhero, she declared one morning to a group of children at the playground. Her words, delivered with proud certainty, drew smiles, laughter, and applause from the other parents. Miracle would often demonstrate her admiration in small ways, clutching Cola's hand tightly when she was scared, hugging him unexpectedly, or bouncing on his shoulders as he carried her home. She believed, with the absolute innocence and conviction of childhood, that he could conquer anything and that he always would. And Kola, despite his success, despite the business he ran and the respect he had earned, never allowed himself to forget those quiet lessons of struggle. He laughed at her antics, guided her gently through small mistakes, and celebrated each victory, no matter how tiny. In public and private, he remained humble, patient, and attentive. He had built a life of comfort, yes, but he had also built a life of love and trust, and that, to him, was far greater than anything money could buy. Together, they moved through the days in a peaceful rhythm, a father and daughter bound by a bond that nothing could break. Miracle grew brighter and braver with each passing day, always eager to tell the world that her father was not just a parent but a hero, a protector, and the most steadfast presence in her life. And Kola, watching her blossom, felt a quiet pride deeper than any wealth he had ever held, a pride that came from knowing he had endured every hardship, carried every burden, and emerged not only a provider but a hero in the eyes of the child who loved him most. Kola paused, his gaze fixed on Amara as she stood there, trembling and pleading, her words spilling out like fragile glass. But even as her voice reached him, a storm of memories began to rise in his mind, faster and louder than the evening wind around them. He could feel each one pressing against his chest, heavy and unyielding, demanding acknowledgement. He remembered the nights he and Miracle had slept on the thin, worn mattress in their tiny one-room home, the only blanket threadbare and damp from the leaks above. Hunger had gnawed at them, sharp and relentless. He had held Miracle close, trying to shelter her from the cold and the empty ache in her bellies, whispering soft lullabies he had made up on the spot to distract them both from the pangs of want. He remembered how he had lain awake listening to her soft breathing, willing it to be enough to mask his own emptiness, willing it to be enough so that she would not wake and cry for food he did not have. He remembered the mornings he had risen before dawn, tying Miracle to his back with the old wrapper that had become their lifeline. He had begged strangers who barely had enough for themselves, to point him towards small jobs, cleaning, carrying, pushing, helping at markets, anything that might yield a few coins. He could still see the doubt in their eyes, the way some had refused, dismissing him as a fool for carrying a baby while searching for work. And yet he had persisted, every step, every day, every weary muscle in his body reminding him that his daughter's life and dignity were worth the suffering. He remembered the nights when Miracle had fallen sick, fever burning her tiny body, and he had carried her for miles on his back to the nearest clinic. Ignoring his own aching limbs, ignoring the sweat stinging his eyes, ignoring the hunger that made his stomach twist. He had whispered to her along the way, soothing her fears with every shivering breath, murmuring, "Papa is here. Papa is here. We will make it, my Miracle." He had spent the little money he had to pay for her medicine, choosing her care over his own. The sleepless nights that followed were long, endless, a blur of worry and exhaustion, yet he never faltered. And now, standing in the warm light of his new home, seeing the woman who had abandoned them years ago, asking for forgiveness, he felt the weight of all those memories pressing on him. The hunger, the struggle, the tears, the endless days of work and worry, they had forged him. They had made him who he was. They had built a life for Miracle that no one could take away, not even the woman who now begged him to forget the past. He shook his head slowly, gently, almost imperceptibly, as if shaking off invisible dust. The movement was small, but it carried the weight of every hardship he had endured, every sacrifice he had made. "No," he said quietly, his voice firm but low, carrying a calm that belied the storm within. Some things cannot be forgotten." Miracle, watching from the balcony, blinked in confusion, sensing the tension but not understanding its depth. Kola's eyes softened as he looked up at her, a flicker of warmth returning to his expression, but it was tinged with steel. He had fought for their life together through struggle and pain. He had protected her, loved her, and given her everything he could. And while the past might be behind them, it had carved a line in the present that he could not, would not, erase. His gaze returned to Amara, unwavering. The plea in her eyes met his resolve. The words that might once have melted his heart now faltered against the reality of the years he had spent alone, carrying the weight of both their lives on his own. He could forgive many things, but he could not undo the nights of hunger, the years of endless labor, the trembling cries of a sick child in his arms. Not even she, the woman who had once promised love, could change that. Kola breathed slowly, deeply, and let the memories settle like stones in the still evening air, each one a testament to the life he had built and the child he had raised. His heart ached, yes, but it also stood strong, unyielding, unbroken. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in crimson and gold, Kola knew that their life, the life he had fought for, was theirs alone, and it would remain that way. The evening was calm, painted in shades of gold and amber as the sun slowly sank behind the distant hills. The air was warm but gentle, carrying the faint scent of flowers from the neighbors' gardens. Miracle was in the living room, giggling as she stacked her small wooden blocks into towers taller than her arms. Kola was in the kitchen, counting receipts from the day's business, the soft rhythm of his pen scratching across paper filling the quiet of the house. For the first time in a long while, everything felt settled, almost serene. The sudden sound of the intercom broke the peace. "Papa Coco, there's someone at the gate." The voice of the security guard crackled through the speaker. Kola frowned slightly. The estate was quiet. It was rare for anyone to come to the gate unannounced. "Who is it?" he asked. The voice came back, hesitant. She says she's your wife." Kola froze, pen hovering over the papers. His heart skipped a beat. His mind went blank for a moment, and then a rush of memories surged through him. The long nights of struggle, the endless days of work with Miracle tied to his back, the years of silent devotion, the stormy night when Amara had vanished without a word. He swallowed hard, a cold wave of disbelief and dread running down his spine. "Your wife?" he repeated slowly, almost to himself, as if speaking it aloud might make it unreal. "Are you sure?" The security guard's voice wavered. "Yes, sir. I saw her. She's standing at the gate. She looks like the woman from before. She says her name is Amara." Kola dropped the pen, leaning back in his chair. His chest tightened, and his fingers clenched against the edge of the table. He felt a strange mixture of anger, confusion, and something else he could not immediately name. Years of heartbreak, of struggle, of fighting alone for Miracle seemed to rise up in his chest like a tidal wave. And yet, a small, reluctant part of him remembered her face, her voice, the life they had shared before the storm of betrayal had torn it all apart. He stood slowly, walking toward the window that looked out over the gate. Miracle, sensing the sudden tension in the room, toddled after him, tugging at his pants and asking, "Papa Coco, what's wrong?" He bent down, brushing her hair from her face, trying to speak calmly, though his own voice trembled. "It's nothing, my darling. Just someone at the gate. Go back to your blocks, okay?" He walked out to the front porch, the soft evening breeze brushing against his face, and his eyes fell on her. Amara. The same face, the same eyes, the same voice he had loved and mourned. She stood there hesitantly, holding her bag close, her posture small yet pleading. Her clothes were neat, her hair carefully arranged, but there was a weariness about her, a softness that spoke of time spent away from this life she had abandoned. "Amara." Kola's voice was low, almost a whisper, caught between disbelief and fury. He didn't step closer. He only let his eyes take in the woman who had once been his world and then disappeared without explanation. She took a small, trembling step forward, her eyes flicking to Miracle, who was peeking curiously from the doorway behind him. "Kola, please. I I need to talk to you," she said, her voice quivering with a mixture of fear and hope. I, I've made mistakes. I want, I want to come back. Please." Cola's hands, which had once carried the weight of blocks, water, and wheelbarrows, now shook as he folded them in front of him. His mind raced. The years of abandonment, the nights spent crying with Miracle in his arms, the endless struggle to build a life for just the two of them. How could he even begin to process this? He looked down at Miracle, who clutched his leg and whispered, "Papa Coco, she's the woman from before, is she?" Cola's chest tightened further, and he swallowed, forcing himself to stay calm. He looked back at Amara, standing there under the fading sunlight, her eyes wide, searching his face for a sign, a flicker of the man she had once known. And in that moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The house was still, the wind quiet, the distant sounds of the estate fading. The past and the present collided in a single heartbeat, leaving Kola to stand there, holding his child, facing the woman who had once been his life, and who now demanded a place in the one he had built alone. The gate seemed to close behind her silently, as if marking the beginning of a confrontation that would test everything Kola had survived, everything he had built, and everything he had loved. Kola stood still for a long moment, the weight of years pressing down on his shoulders like a stone. Amara's words echoed in his ears, soft yet desperate. Kola, forgive me. I was foolish. I want my family back. The wind rustled gently through the trees, carrying the faint scent of rain from earlier in the evening. And for a moment, he closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. His chest heaved, each breath heavy and measured. Memories of the stormy night when she had vanished came rushing back, the endless nights of crying, the tiny hands of Miracle clinging to him, the bitter taste of betrayal. Anger surged up, sharp and hot, but beneath it, a deeper, quieter ache lingered. The love he had never fully stopped feeling, the life they had once dreamed of together, and the daughter who deserved a whole family. Slowly, he began to move toward her, each step deliberate, slow, like a man carrying not just his own heart, but the weight of all the years she had abandoned. His eyes, dark and stormy, held a mixture of pain, disbelief, and unspoken questions. His hands hung loosely at his sides, trembling slightly, not with fear, but with the raw emotion of seeing the woman who had left him standing there, vulnerable and asking for what she had thrown away. Miracle, perched on the balcony above, watched with wide, innocent eyes. She clutched the railing, her tiny fingers trembling as she leaned forward to see her father's face. "Papa Coco," she whispered softly, her voice trembling with confusion. She didn't understand fully, but she could feel the tension radiating from the two adults below. She saw the sorrow in her father's eyes, the pleading in her mother's, and her little heart pounded with unease. Amara took a tentative step forward as Kola approached, her voice breaking. "Please, please, Kola. I was wrong. I see it now. I was foolish, selfish. I want my family back. I want us. I want Miracle. I want you." Kola stopped just a few feet from her, the evening light casting long shadows over his strong, weathered face. He looked down at her, then glanced upward at Miracle, whose small, curious eyes searched him for guidance, for a sign of what was right. His breathing was loud, each inhale and exhale a storm in itself, reflecting the torrent of emotions raging inside him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath, the rustling leaves, the distant hum of the estate, the quiet stirrings of night itself pausing to witness the reunion that might never be. Kola's gaze hardened, a mixture of sorrow and resolve locking his expression. He could see her regret, feel her longing, but the years of abandonment, the nights spent alone with Miracle, the struggle to raise their daughter without her, they were etched deep into his soul. Miracle, still on the balcony, leaned closer, her small hands gripping the railing. "Papa, is she coming back?" she asked, confusion and hope mingling in her soft voice. Kola looked up at his daughter, his chest tightening further. He bent down slightly, cradling her face in his hands, and whispered, "We'll see. My little Miracle, we'll see." And in that moment, the air between him and Amara crackled with tension, longing, and the unspoken question that would define what came next. Could love survive betrayal? Or had the years of pain changed everything forever? Cola's eyes were steady, unwavering, fixed on Amara as she stood there, trembling, her voice breaking, trying to reach a place inside him that had long since closed. The soft evening breeze stirred the edges of her wrapper, but it could not lift the weight of her guilt. Nor could it bridge the years she had vanished, the nights she had abandoned them, or the struggles she had left him to face alone. "You left us when we needed you most," Kola said slowly, each word deliberate, carrying the weight of years, pain, and sacrifice. His voice was calm, but beneath it lay the storm of memories he had held tightly all these years, the nights of hunger. The days spent begging for work, the nights Miracle cried feverishly on his back as he carried her to clinics and prayed for her survival. "I don't hate you, but I can't go back." Amara's hands rose slightly, as if to reach for him, to plead, to touch what she had once called home. But Kola did not move closer. He did not need to. She sank to her knees in the soft grass of the driveway, clutching the bag at her side, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Kola, please. I, I've realized. I've been foolish. I want, I want my family back." But Kola only shook his head gently, almost imperceptibly, his jaw tight. And yet, he felt nothing but quiet resolve. The years she had abandoned them could not be rewritten. He had loved, he had fought, he had survived, and that life belonged solely to him and his daughter. He bent down carefully, lifting Miracle from her perch on the balcony. The little girl's bright eyes blinked at Amara in confusion, a soft Papa Coco escaping her lips. Kola held Miracle close, feeling her tiny heartbeat against his chest, a steady rhythm that had sustained him through every hardship. He smiled faintly at her, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead, and in that simple act, he made a silent promise. No one could take her from him, not even her own mother. Amara's voice faltered, caught between sobs and a plea. "Miracle, please, it's me, your mother." But Miracle did not speak, only nestled closer into her father's arms, looking up at him with trust that needed no words. Kola turned slightly, letting the shadows of the evening fall over her outstretched hands. With a deep, steadying breath, he began to walk away. Each step was deliberate, carrying the weight of his past struggles and the strength he had forged through them. Amara's sobs pierced the evening air, but they could not reach him. He did not look back. He carried Miracle in his arms, her small body wrapped securely against his chest, and with each step, the gate of his heart closed a little more. By the time he reached the driveway gate, the sun had fully dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of violet and crimson. He pressed the latch, sliding it closed with a finality that resonated louder than any word could. The gate was shut, a silent barrier against the past, against betrayal, against pain. Behind it lay a new life, one he had built with sweat, love, and unwavering devotion. Amara collapsed onto the grass, the realization of her loss sinking in fully. She had come back too late. She had begged, pleaded, and broken, but the man and child she had once taken for granted were gone, untouchable, unyielding. Kola, walking forward with Miracle in his arms, had closed the door to the past forever. And in the quiet aftermath, the night embraced them, the father and daughter moving forward together, leaving behind the shadows of what had been lost, stronger, unbroken, and bound by a love that no one, not even a mother returned, could undo.